great. And I'm going to keep swigging from my teas.
Helen, where are you, by the way, physically?
I'm in Amsterdam.
Okay. It's very global. I'm in California. It's raining like crazy.
Oh, we've just had a hello
Right in
from
Toronto.
Brian in Toronto. That was great timing, Brian.
We can have how bad is the weather competition? It's pretty
Yeah.
bad.
Oh, lots of Toronto folks styling in. That's great. Welcome, welcome. No, actually, you know what? It's been sunny here today, which always helps, hey, when there's a blue sky. So, can't complain. Paris, lovely.
North Carolina, Chicago.
How cold is it in Chicago? All right, so yeah, this is really nice. We talk a lot here about like the international community, and this just proves that this is that. So yeah, I'm based in Amsterdam. Nick is on the west coast of the US, and a bunch of folks all over the world. Thank you everybody for dialing in. I think we'll kick things off. We're also recording this session, so it will be available for everybody to access afterwards. And if you are listening to this after the fact, welcome as well. Thank you. So I'm Helen. I'm responsible for our customer and our people experiences at Cadence. And one of the things I love the most about my role is bringing our community together like this. So I'm just super delighted to have Nick with us, friend of Cadence and a big part of this international community. We were talking just before the call, and a lot of people know of Nick. So great to be able to introduce him kind of more officially here to our customers. Nick, do you want to do your introduction?
Yeah, it will be quick. So I'm Nick Bloom. I've oddly enough been working from home for about 20 years. I have to say no one was that interested until March 2020, and then things kind of exploded. Um, I am also an investor in Cadence. I'm from the get-go, I've been a believer in Cadence. And I'm going to just talk about the future of working from home. And with that, why don't I just go to my slides? So I'll talk for like 20 minutes, I think, not too long, and then we'll go to open Q&A.
Yeah, and please, folks, if you could start sticking the questions in the chat, as soon as you have them, we'll take them at the end of Nick's content, but please do start sticking them in as we go through.
So where are we on working from home? I'm going to do two things. One is I'm just going to give you some kind of nerdy data on where we are, which actually is quite surprising for some people. And then second, I'm going to give you some thoughts on managing hybrid and remote. And so firstly, where are we? It turns out work from home levels have kind of stalled out. Hybrid is incredibly common. 80% of Fortune 500 companies have their managers and professionals on hybrid. Just to talk about the data, so this is surveys. This is US data. I'll talk about international data in a little bit, but it's similar patterns. This is US data. Here is the share of full paid days that are work from home, that folks that just work the full day. Before pandemics, about 7%. Some people did it, but it's not that common. During the peak of the pandemic, of the lockdowns, March, April, May 2020, it was 60%. It's kind of incredible, actually, that more than half of fully paid work days in the US were from home. You see it's clearly dropping. That's no surprise, it's dropping throughout 2020, 21, 22. What you see is from beginning of 23 onwards, work from home days stabilize. Now I'm showing you two figures. One is Sway. It's our own survey that we run. It's 10,000 Americans a month. The other is the census. It's 40,000 folks a month, but they show the same thing. Work from home's kind of flattened out and it hasn't really dropped much in the last year and a half, almost 2 years. So maybe you're thinking, well, look, this is survey data. It's not very reliable. How do we know what on earth's going on? So I'll show you two other data series that show the same story. So this is Castle. They run security for a bunch of big offices around US cities. So they have hundreds of offices. These are kind of, big shiny buildings and city centers. So you should think this is what this measures. It's footfall into these buildings. This is versus February 2020. So in March 2020, not surprisingly, footfall was down, more than 80%. No one was really going in, apart from support staff. and a few others. Now it's rising, rising, rising. But again, the same story. Footfall's kind of flattened out at about 50, 60% from the beginning of 23 onwards. And notice this data goes right up to early, mid, in fact, late January. So on footfall and swipes in and out, we really don't see a full return. We see it's stalled out. And then finally, we can look at cell phone or mobile phone mobility data. So, I have my phone here, kind of like most people, our phones never leave our sides. If you track phones, you basically can track people. And this is from Placer AI. And again, it's the same story. So yes, there's an enormous drop in office traffic at the beginning of the pandemic. Yes, it recovered, but that recovery stalled out. So people then ask me like endlessly, why does it feel like the media is claiming that work from home is over? And I talk to a lot of journalists, there is a very natural thing in media, which is as a journalist, you have to write pieces that people read, click, send around. You're partly, incentivized to write popular news articles. And to do that, it's much easier to, write a story that says work from home is over, everyone's back in the office, than some kind of thing that says, look, it's here to stay. So the media, for reasons that we all understand, is kind of biased on this. And if you look at the big underlying data, work from home has flattened out. Why is that? Well, one slide on this, it's basically because it's profitable. So to explain this, I'll just show you one paper, which is I published in Nature last summer. And the story is very simple. So we took a company called Trip.com. James Liang, who's one of my two co-authors, was actually the founding CEO. CEO now is Jane's son, but he's now the chairman. Trip.com is a massive company. They have 40,000 employees. They're worth about $50 billion. They're quoted on NASDAQ. So this is a big travel agent. They're kind of like, one of the big three along with Expedia and Booking. And what Trip did is they took two divisions of graduates. So probably pretty much like everyone on this call, they're in engineering, marketing, finance, and accounting. So these are professionals. A third of them actually were postgrads. They had MBAs, PhDs, masters, etc. And they did a randomized control trial. So quite amazing. They split them into half, about 802 groups. The control group had to come into the office 5 days a week. So no work from home for those folks. They were people born on the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th of the month. And the treatment group, they got to work from home Wednesday and Friday, were born on the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th of the month. So it's like you randomly create two groups. Half of them get hybrid, half of them have to come in the office 5 days a week. And they collected very detailed data for the next 24 months. So what do we find? So there are two results. The first result's like a null result. There was just no impact on performance. So promotions, performance reviews, leadership scores, innovation scores, lines of code written for the coders, nothing went up, nothing went down. It was, it's not good, it's not bad. Hybrid and fully in person were the same. When you interviewed them, when we spoke, I worked with the executive, the C-suite on this, and when we interviewed them, folks would say, look, there is definitely a benefit from coming into the office. They said, look, it's really helpful for mentoring, for innovation, for building culture, for sure. But they also said, look, by the time you're coming in 3 days a week, it's really less obvious of days 4 and 5 how much additional benefit you get. Yes, there's a bit more mentoring, innovation, and culture. But they said, set against that, if you're working from home a couple of days a week, A, it's quieter, so it's actually easier to do some kind of deep work, reading, concentrated stuff. And B, you're saving about an hour and a half from avoiding commuting and, grooming for work. And that time, some of it is used for working more. So fact one, there's no impact on performance. Fact two, which is the figure on the right, quit rates fell by 35%. And for Trip.com, they said, look, this is saving us. This will save us, rolled out across the business, tens of millions of dollars, because every person that quits, we've got to go out, re-advertise, re-interview, retrain, get them up to speed, plug them into a team. They said each attrition and rehire probably costs us at least $50,000. And in fact, the Society of Human Resource Managers estimates replacing someone is typically 50 to 100% of their annual salary. So this is why hybrid is stuck. It's just phenomenally profitable for companies. Hybrid seems not on average to affect performance, but saves a lot of money in terms of reduced turnover. So how does this look like across countries? So this is a grand reveal. This is new data, like brand new. I've never put it out. This is like late 24 earlier. This is just fresh new data. This shows work from home around the world in the end of 24, beginning of 25. So literally now. I've been collecting this data year by year, and I have to say this looks very much like 2023. So globally, it seems like work from home is also kind of stabilized now. What you see is Northern Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand have pretty high levels. As you go into Southern Europe, kind of Africa, South America, it kind of drops a bit. It tends to be lowest in Asia. All of these countries have seen a big increase, but generally, when I talk to multinationals, if you look at office occupancy data, Europe, North America is the highest level, and Asia tends to be the lowest. It also varies massively by industry. This is, I think, much more important actually than by country. You notice that finance, insurance, tech, information, business services, what most, many of Cadence's customers are in that segment. They tend to be pretty high levels of work from home. Typically, it'd be 3 days in the office, 2 at home. Why is that? Well, if you're working on a computer, it's a kind of activity, that can be done at home a couple of days a week. So if you take me personally, I'm a university professor. Teaching is in person. It's much better in person. Monday, Wednesday, I teach. Seminars, meetings are better in person. But actually, to be honest, reading, writing, obviously Zoom calls are just easier to do from home. So I'm on hybrid. I'm typically in 3 days a week and at home for 2. So how would I manage it? I'm going to go through a few tips on management, and then I'll stop and go to the open discussion. So first thing, just to point out, managing it is really hard. There are several reasons why it's hard, but one reason is just this figure. So we have surveyed tens of thousands of people across many countries and asked them how much work from home they want. And you basically get roughly the same story over and over again. So what is that story? It is that about 20% of people just don't want to work from home at all. So, I have 2 kids that are, a 19 and a 21-year-old, and like, they don't really, them and their friends, they don't really want to work from home at all when they start their job. They say, look, I want to get mentored. I want to go in and socialize. My apartment, my flat is not going to be great. Where am I going to work from home? They basically want to come in 5 days a week. So there's a segment, about a fifth of people that just want to go in every day. At the other extreme, there's a bigger group, about 30%, that want to work from home 5 days a week. They often live further away, have young kids, maybe have a bit more money in a nicer house, a long commute. Maybe they have a disability. There's a set of reasons. And then there's about 50%, the biggest group, they're in the middle, that want some variation of hybrid. So generally, particularly for large companies, it's going to be hard to keep everyone happy. And it's another reason why hybrid is kind of won out. It's in the middle. Look, it's kind of like vanilla ice cream. It's not like everyone's favor of flavor, but no one really disagrees too heavily with vanilla ice cream. And so hybrid in that sense is kind of a middle point. It's about the average. So the average of what people want is something like 3 days at home, 2 in the office. What's averaging for what firms are offering is similar. It's probably 2 days at home and 3 in the office. So what are the tips, given this, what are the tips to make it work? The first tip, and maybe it's very obvious, but just to state the obvious, is coordination. So we surveyed tens of thousands of people again and we asked them, why do you want to work from home? And the obvious reasons why people want to work from home is they say they don't like commuting, they want to flex their time, they don't want to get dressed up, etc. This is the reverse. We then asked people, why do you like to go into the office? Having just shown you the slide before, there are a lot of people, me included, that like to go in, at least a few days each week. And the answers are all around socializing with co-workers and face-to-face collaboration. I have to say, for any managers, FaceTime with my managers lower down there. We did have things on food and bagels. It just doesn't make it. So it's really not about the ping pong table. It's basically people want to go in, see their coworkers, socialize, work face to face. And if there's one thing that sends people crazy, I've heard over and over again, is employees complaining that they get pulled into the office and then half their team isn't there and they spend all day on Zoom. And they're like, why did I come in? Commute for an hour and a half total and get dressed up just to spend the day on Zoom. So coordination is critical. How do you do that? Well, one thing is be very clear. So I would generally pick, say, 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and have those as the common days and get everyone to coordinate them. You can do that either team by team or at the company level. Another thing is just being systematic. So I put some, beyond just picking common days, I put another kind of database thing. From talking to companies, there are a few other steps that help coordination. One is actually measuring what's going on. So talking to firms, the firms that generally manage to coordinate it have some management and evaluation of this. So they firstly collect some kind of attendance data from swipes, Wi-Fi logins. You know, I know Cadence has Cadence Sense that's coming out. And also importantly, you have to measure travel exceptions. So the one thing you don't want to do is penalize employees that say go to customers, are going to conferences, going to sales trips, and because they're not logging in, they seem to get penalized. I know in the Cadence system, one way to do that is to set up just another building called travel and then maybe another building called, you know, at customers and have people book a desk there, which lets the system know that that's what they're up to. Second thing is regular dissemination. So typically monthly reports emailed out to managers, letting them know roughly how many days folks are coming in. When you talk to companies that say have a 3-day in the office mandate, typically you're seeing at best 2.5, but it lets you at least spot, look, if somebody or their team is, you know, in a half a day a week, it's probably worth following up and checking what's going on. The reason for doing that is imagine there's a team of 10 people and one person just is regularly not coming in. It's not just affecting them, it's affecting everyone else, because anyone that wants to meet with them has to, you know, go on Zoom. If you have a meeting of 4 people and that person isn't in, you all have to go on Zoom, and it kind of generates unhappiness, you know, complaints, grumbling from the rest of the team that have come in on those days. And thirdly, a sensible plan is a lot easier to enforce than something that's over the top. So about 3 weeks ago, I, oddly enough, visiting 2 different large organizations, very large organizations, both with, you know, 10,000 plus employees in the same industry. And they're a perfect case study of what's a good policy. So organization A had a 4-day-a-week mandate that they had told employees, but they didn't enforce it properly and they'd not tried to coordinate on days. When I talk to folks, they're saying, look, people are coming in probably 2-3 days a week. They're, you know, skipping a bunch, but they're in on all kinds of different days. Whenever I'm in, you know, other people are not there, and it was really chaotic and didn't work very well. Organization B had said, look, we're just going to have people come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and encourage folks to work from home if they wanted on Monday, Friday, but they enforced it. And what I spoke to them is they said, look, turns out the office is really busy. Interestingly, they said, look, high performers, you know, if they don't want to, they're a bit more relaxed on the Wednesday, but Tuesday, Thursday is a, you know, a necessity for everyone to come in. Said those days you can organize meetings, events, lunches, you know, folks will be in. So it's a lot easier if you have a realistic, sensible plan to actually enforce it than some kind of 5-day full RTO that can be tough to actually execute on the ground. And, you know, one thing this does for real estate people, it's difficult. It can generate a squeeze into Tuesday to Thursday. There may be trade-offs. I mean, this is a classic thing. You may be trading off less office utilization versus lower turnover rates, you know, higher staff satisfaction. I think that's fine. In a sense, pre-pandemic offices were already empty Saturday, Sunday at night. So it's not like pre-pandemic, they were fully occupied anyway. Now occupancy rates are down a bit, but there's a trade-off to reducing turnover, and turnover is probably much more costly than having offices empty on Mondays and Fridays. Whoops, wrong way. So the other big thing is performance reviews. So one is coordination and how to manage it. The other thing is focusing on performance. So this has come up a lot, which is managers will say, look, when I was in the office pre-pandemic, I could see what employees were doing. I could kind of watch them. Are they at their desk typing away? When I walk by, are they, you know, is it Excel, Python, or are they watching Champions League or a movie, or, you know, playing online games or something? And they said, look, it's not great. It's kind of 5 out of 10 management, but I can kind of get away with it because I can see what people are up to. When people are working from home, you cannot desk watch them. You really don't know what they're up to. And so you can't really evaluate, observe inputs. What instead you need to have increased focus on is evaluating outputs. So how they're performing, data assessment, 360 reviews, etc. So importantly, this is not about surveillance like keystroke monitoring, you know, camera shots, etc., which is extremely unpopular, at least in Europe and North America. But it's more about trying to have pretty rigorous, and this is often HR driven, processes to evaluate employees, how they're doing. And what it means is, if Helen's, say, managing me, if she sees my performance starts to drop, she can, you know, reach out, interact with me, check what's going on. And on my side as an employee, it's a little bit easier. I'm not feeling that Helen's desk watching or, you know, checking that I respond to emails quickly. If I say when I go to the dentist on my Friday work from home day, I can do it, but I have to make up for it by working in the evenings and the weekend. Finally, what about the future? if I look, 3-5 years out, is work from home going to drop back down? I actually, don't think so. To start with this, just go through some historical data. So this is work from home data for the US, and it goes back to 1965. It's on a log scale to kind of fit it in because the growth is, so fast. What you can see is it's basically pretty steadily growing all the way since the 60s. So what's going on here? Well, this is just the onward march of technologies. So I'm 51. I grew up in, you can tell from my accent, I grew up in the UK. I'm one of 4 kids. Both my mum and my dad worked. When I was a kid, I remember actually I talked to my mum about this recently. She said, look, when you guys were kids, if someone is sick or you needed to, take a day off school, or there was the water pipe burst, one of my mum or dad would stay home, would work from home for the day. And they said, look, in the 80s, it was terrible. They said it was like carrying pieces of paper, telephone calls that were really expensive, just awful. And they said, look, by the time you got to the 90s, the personal computer came around. It was easier to work from home. By the 2000s, you're getting the internet, 2010s, cloud, video calls, etc. So technology is getting ever better and making it easier and easier to work from home. So with that view on history, what does the future look like? I think the future is more of the same. So my prediction is looking 5-10 years out, things like virtual reality, augmented reality, something, I've seen prototypes and some quite amazing software. So this is something called a portal, which is like a 12 by 12 foot kind of a video call. I was in Google recently, they have something called Starliner, which is an incredible 3D version. All of these types of things are going to make it easier in the long run to work from home. So my prediction over the long run is what I call a Nike swoosh. It was dropped, work from home level was dropped from 2020, 21, 22. They're in the flat bit now. And in the long run, they're going to slowly rise back up again. So, don't believe the hype. Work from home is definitely here to stay. And in fact, 5-10 years from now, it's going to be higher than it is now. So, hybrid has become normed for managers and professionals, typically 1, 2, 3 days a week. Managing it is hard. And I think the most important thing is coordination, backed up, to be honest, by a bit of data and some kind of enforcement teeth. And secondly, a performance review to make sure we focus much more for workers at home on what they achieve rather than just clocking off hours. With that, I'll stop and go to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Nick. I've been making notes of all these great questions. Thank you, folks. Please keep them coming. I'm going to dive straight in. I'm going to start with Sam. So Sam asked a question following your Trip.com example. So did Trip.com change its leadership style in the transition to hybrid? So servant leadership style was noted as a key enabler in the research study.
Interesting question. I don't know, actually. They didn't change their leadership. The interesting thing in Trip.com, and you can see it in the paper, actually, in the Nature paper, is we polled employees beforehand. So we have 1,600 people, of which about 400 of them are managers, mostly, as you can imagine, junior, but some middle and senior managers, and 1,200 were non-managerial staff, because we got kind of 2 pyramids from 2 different divisions. And what you saw in advance is managers were somewhat skeptical. They actually predicted in advance that the impact of hybrid will be negative for productivity. They said -2%. Employees were already in advance kind of optimistic. After the experiment was run, managers updated to being positive. So I think the burden of this does fall more heavily on managers. It's harder to manage in particular. And they also tend to be somewhat more skeptical. I manage employees, and indeed it is nice to see people in person. So I think, one of the other things on the coordination, there's very much a deliberacy about when you're in focusing on activities that make sense to be in. So if you're a multinational, if you're having cross-office Zooms, if possible, it's best to push them into home days. There's no point, there's some things you can't deal with, something comes up quickly. I don't know, if you're affected by the LA fires, you have to respond immediately. But to the extent to which there's training, lunches, events, it makes sense to organize them in the office. But I don't think they radically changed their style beyond this thing on performance evaluation. So Trip was like, okay, we cannot observe what people are doing as much when they're working from home, so we have to focus more on output.
Yeah. Great. I've just noticed Zach had a good question just to sort of set the frame of reference when we refer to hybrid. Are we specifically talking about companies with a single office where employees split time between remote and in office, or does hybrid also encompass companies operating across multiple offices, co-working spaces, different countries? So yeah, good to. What's your definition?
Generally, my definition of hybrid is work from home. It is some combination of in office slash travel, wherever that may be, and work from home. So a classic hybrid thing, maybe you have 2 days at home. Now, some people may not choose to work from home. You don't want to force people. If you want to go and work in your parents' or your friend's house or even come in, that's fine. But there's 2 days where you're not required to be anywhere, classically Monday, Friday. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're in the office, but you may be traveling. So travel definitely counts. If you're traveling for work, you're visiting clients, customers, that's a positive. That's one of the, by the way, the really important reasons for having an ability to measure that. The nightmare scenario, which I fear say could happen in Amazon, is I'm a manager. I'm given a mandate to get my folks in 5 days a week, and all they have is swipe measurement. So you've no idea if somebody's going to see a customer or a client. They're not swiping in. It looks like they're working from home, and it looks like I'm missing my mandate. So as a manager, tell people to get in. And it's actually bad for the business because they don't go and see customers, they don't go to trade shows, they don't go, network, etc. So you need a system for, this is why I mentioned you want to have an office which is called, I don't know, travel, and another one which is called visiting customers. So people can just book a desk there for a day and you can be aware that that's what they're up to. So you don't have this bad distortion of incentivizing people to go see, never see customers.
We are getting lots of questions about the like behavioral part, culture, how you enforce. Amy asked, have you seen any data that supports a full flex policy that enables the employees to design their work week in office and remote days based on the work and the type of work needed?
There are a bunch of companies that, there's every which way out there. So there are a bunch of companies that are what I call fully remote or have totally flexible, which is they have offices, they don't force you to come in and they let you and they give you the choice. And some people choose to come in and some choose not to come in. One of the, it depends on the nature of the individual. So at one extreme, if you have a lot of 20 somethings that want mentoring that are early in their career, they benefit from having other people around them. So, if I pull my undergrads, they basically typically when I go into a firm that people are coming in 3-4 days a week to kind of learn and get mentored. If on the other hand, let's say at the other extreme, we have a startup in tech land that has some 30, 40 somethings that are highly motivated, not many of them, lots of experience, they maybe never need to come in at all. They're 15 years in, they're motivated, they maybe meet sporadically in cafes, etc. So I think it depends a lot on the shape of what people are doing in your workforce. I would say the kind of vanilla flavor when I see across countries and companies is hybrid. And it's typically 3 days in the office, but this is not one size fits all. I was just focusing on that because that's the most common. But that's definitely not the only way to do it. I mean, for me, for example, I come in for teaching days and we have a kind of group meeting day that everyone comes in on Thursday. So it's early today, but I'll be going in, in California, I'll be going in pretty soon after this. I'm at home right now, but it just, we work from home is Tuesday, Friday for me. So that's a kind of weird cadence, but it just happens to fit the business or the university.
And what about kind of policy versus reality? Brian was asking this. Are you seeing policies being effective? I would say from a cadence perspective, we don't always. So something's set and then for the first few months, people adhere to it and then they kind of go back to what they were doing before, unless something's changing in terms of like the way that the organization is as you said before, creating some structure for those employees to be consistent in the way they come in or work from home. What's your...
Exactly right. So first thing, I was talking to a company last week and, seeing that they do a lot of data analytics. They actually work with tracking folks in, and they said typically if you're asking for 5, you're seeing like 2.5 if you're asking for 3. So the gap grows as you require more days in because it's harder and harder to enforce it. So fact one, there's definitely a gap. They said they don't know why. That's one of the problems with missing data. They said, the clients are unsure whether people are out meeting, the companies are unsure whether employees are out meeting clients, going to training, traveling, or maybe they're working from home. So data is really important to be aware when people are not in the office, why that is. Or maybe their kid is sick or the pipe burst and it's legitimate to work from home. So actually measuring stuff is pretty critical here to enforcing it. Point 2 is, you're exactly right, Helen, I hear over and over again, that you have these big enforcement drives. So some RTO, office attendance goes up and then it slowly drops back down again. So being consistent over time, if you want people in 3 days a week, you need to, have some kind of ongoing enforcement rather than a big purge and then move to something else. And then
Yeah.
finally, I think most critically is the plan has to make sense. This is why I'm not sure Amazon is ever going to get people in 5 days a week, because there's no business sense in it. And the managers aren't on board with it either. So if Helen's managing me, imagine this, Helen's managing me and a team of 9 other people in Amazon. She's a middle manager. I'm a really high performer. And I've told her, look, if you make me come in 5 days a week, I'm quitting. So what's Helen going to do? Well, Helen probably cares more about team performance because it affects her bonus and her promotion possibilities. So she's going to say, look, Nick, when HR, hassles me about you only coming in 3 days a week, I'm just going to say, oh, Nick is traveling for business, meeting customers and clients. HR has no idea because this isn't measured. Let's her get
No.
away with it. So you need a sensible plan that managers are on board. If instead it was 3 days a week and Helen thought it made sense for me to come in, if I didn't do it, she'd have a direct line to me. So a sensible, there's an old saying, it goes back to the Romans, that a sensible law is, is an enforced law. It's impossible to make a law that's ridiculous. People just don't enforce it, so it just gets ignored.
And I think Brian's asking about data. Having the right data is so critical here, isn't it? So Brian's asking about like the effectiveness of office time, how you test that, what you use to understand the effectiveness of being in or not. And then there's also the measurement of, for example, the carbon footprint. So yeah, this is a lot. There's all of a sudden a lot of data to start collecting and measure and make meaningful.
Yeah, so I break it down. Great question, Brian. On the performance, it is hard to measure in many businesses. So often I'll get said, how do you measure productivity? And it is often very difficult to measure productivity. So if I take my job that I know well, I teach and write research and do university service. I have a mix of activities, and some of them, like teaching, are easier because I have performance reviews. Other than like helping out in university committees is really hard. There are no metrics. It's a mess. So that is quite hard. I think there are certain studies like the one I put out in Nature where sure you have some concrete measures, but that is not the norm. Generally, the view is, and if you talk to managers, particularly senior managers, they have some sense you want people in. Normally, they'll talk about mentoring, innovation, and building culture. And for many companies and situations, I'm aligned with that. It's a case by case, but broadly, even in most companies I talk to, that makes sense to have people in for some days a week. Is it possible to concretely show that? In the short run, it may be hard, but in the long run, you can imagine that if people are, for example, if mentoring's not happening, you're going to get very high churn of new employees because they're going to feel their career isn't progressed. So that kind of performance stuff is hard to measure. What is definitely easier to measure is how many days people are coming in. And generally, the view is you should combine both swipes and Wi-Fi logins because they're different. Neither's perfect. You want to combine them together. And importantly, you need to measure, have some way to document if people are not in, why. Because if they're in, you really don't want to discourage people going to meet clients and customers and going,
No.
I used to be at McKinsey, and the last thing McKinsey would want to is discourage me as a consultant going to the client site. It's exactly what they want. So,
Yeah.
so they need to measure why I'm not in. And if I'm at home, that's one thing. And if I'm at home, is it because my kid is sick, or I'm sick? That's another thing. You don't want to encourage employees to come in when they're sick. So measurement is kind of everything on this.
And how do you get this balance right? There's a few questions coming in about trust, right? Like we're talking a lot about data and tracking and understanding who's in and who's not. How do you get that conversation happening with employees so that they understand that this is about the benefit to them ultimately? Yeah, that one, we get that a lot too at Cadence. How would you address that?
The hardest thing is somebody saying, look, I can do my job when I'm working from home. They'll say, like, I can work from home, I'm really efficient. The issue is it's not just about individuals' jobs, it's about everyone else. And there's a big positive benefit. So if, Helen, you and I are working together, if you stay home and I come in, I've come in expecting to meet you, to talk to you, to have meetings, maybe to go to lunch, or there's a meeting of 6 of us. If you're now at home, in that meeting of 6, we could go to a particular room, log in on Zoom, connect you, and it's just irritating and painful. And so
Yeah.
the main thing is, look, this is a company and a team thing. It's not a kind of, you're the pale rider, whatever that, the lone rider in those cowboy films where you can just go off and do it on your own. You're basically part of a team role. In fact, if someone is a kind of individual contributor and that's all they do, maybe that is a role that's great to be working from home. I mean, if you don't engage with anyone else, yes, but as soon as you have a role whereby you're working in a team and working with other people, then at that point, being in on the days your team is in. Makes sense. And a lot of it comes around to mentoring. It's an interesting, I talked to a bunch of law firms, and law firms are an extreme version of this. So law firms, the new associates, they want to come in 4 or 5 days a week. So they want to learn, get up to speed, get mentored, etc. Often the partners, who you should imagine have in your mind, they're like early, mid 40s, have young kids, a lot of money, very nice
Mm.
house. They're like, I don't want to come in at all, or maybe come in 1 day a week because I can work very well from home. The problem is they have to do the mentoring. Like, you can't have an organization where only half the office is in. So this is classically why middle and senior management really need to be in on the same days. And if they're, that's also why you want to have a sensible policy. If you tell them 5 days a week, they just don't comply, and then it's, chaos.
Yeah. And who is owning this? Are you seeing typically? Who is a key responsible individual for what we're describing? Because it's complex.
It is so generally, I mean, generally these policies are set by, CPOs with alongside CEOs, because CEOs get asked about this. CEOs don't want to talk about it typically in public, so they don't want to be seen as
Mm.
it's a sensitive topic and they're getting harassed by every side. But they and, chief person officers, chief human resource officers are typically making the decisions in terms of where the data and enforcement. Generally, what will happen is on that weekly or monthly email you get with, your spreadsheet, as a manager, you'll get your team. And then if the sub teams below that, you'll get that breakdown. So if I'm in charge of, let's say 100 people directly in my pyramid, I'll get my direct reports and then each of the groups below them to get a sense. And, I don't want to, business is about performance. So the main, objective is performance. And I'm not, particularly pushing aggressive tracking of this stuff, but there is a common good thing here, which is if I
Yeah.
start working from home, I negatively impact everyone else. And that's the main reason why you need some of these enforcement things. It's not just about me. If I don't come in, no one else can work with me, and, I become disengaged.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, that is a conversation, isn't it? And it's how you keep having that conversation with staff and their managers.
I mean, another way that often managers have done this is, look, work from home is under assault. You need to, if we want to make it work in our company and successful, we want to allow you to work from home, but we need a compromise that's sustainable and sellable to the shareholders. And that's probably, often come in 3 and work from home 2. If you try and push for something that's too many days at home, you could find, shareholder revolt. The last thing you want is some tough ass comes in and says, look, you got to be in 5 days a week, week in, week out. And we're going to iron enforce it, because that is not a great place to be.
We're getting close to time. We've got tons of questions coming in now. So I think what we're going to do is make a note of the questions. And if we haven't addressed them, folks, we're going to come back to you, because there's just loads, and which is really great to see.
By the way, Helen, one other thought was crowdsourcing some of this stuff. I mean, I'm definitely don't want to portray myself as the oracle of all of this. So I'd actually be fascinated to hear what other people's views are.
Yeah.
Most of what I know is just from, I probably talk to 2, 3 companies a day, or often journalists as well, that would say, I'm just talking to this firm and it's doing this. So partly that, partly data, but it'd be interesting to hear views from other folks. If you put them out and you have some, if folks have answers, we could kind of have a little document with.
Yeah. Pull the answers. But we are going to share the recording, and we will, let's do that. We'll share the answers to these questions. I did just stick in the chat here a link to the Future Forum, which is Brian Elliott's work. I'm sure a lot of you have come across Brian Elliott, but I just absolutely love the Future Forum content. It's really practical information about how you might go about designing some of this structure that we've been talking about, the conversation between employer and employee. So take a look at that. Hopefully that's helpful.
Something else. What should we do with offices on Friday? I think under hybrid, there is some trade-off between utilization of offices and keeping employees happy. And you can't, offices, you actually pay for them, whatever, there's 168 hours in the week. So you just pay for them and you take it. That's a sunk cost. So they are just less occupied on a Friday. This comes up a lot, that real estate folks are getting beaten up by CEOs about underutilized offices. The problem is, if you go to an alternative thing like shift, team A is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, team B is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, team C, etc. It means A, teams don't overlap. B, you've got to have clear desks. People are going to clear their desk out. And C, you'll find that somebody's got a Friday, some other team's got a Monday. They're often unhappy about it and complain. And then, it's not that easy to execute these rota systems. And generally, firms have stayed away from it. And in the end, they've just the typical thing is just ended up with saying, look, we know it's inefficient on space, but the bigger objective is the business performance. And it turns out the business performance is maximized, either letting teams choose or just norming a set of days for the business. And typically both end up pretty similarly. You see Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that.
Yeah, Brian's actually asking something similar about dwell time. Are you seeing dwell time be a metric as opposed to days in the office? So yeah,
It's a great
time
question.
spent together.
It's harder to measure that. I mean, I know Cadence Sense is coming out with Wi-Fi logins. It's actually very hard for organizations to measure that because generally you don't swipe out. So they have no idea on dwell time. I have seen other data. I'm looking at tracking data from GPS from cars where you can look at commutes. It looks like dwell time is shortened because, of course, now everyone's okay with me taking a Zoom call at 7 a.m. because I got to contact, the Amsterdam office and coming into the office a bit later. So actually people sometimes are arriving later or leaving earlier and saying, I'll just work from home in the morning and evening, which has now become totally normed. So the working day is shifting around more. So I suspect dwell time is probably shorter on a given day as well.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do one more question and I think we'll wrap. So what about the impact of mandates on things like sustainability? Requiring people to drive 30k distances to sit on team calls all day, accessibility issues, many people differing abilities, joining companies during the pandemic may not be able to come in 3 to 4 days. Yeah, how
So again, I'm in favor of work from home. So don't get me wrong. I kind of want to go for something that is sustainable because my fear is if you push for something that, is easy to attack by shareholders, you could end up with a 5-day mandate. So you kind of want to, I think 3 is defensible in the office, 2 at home, or maybe 2 in the office and 3 at home. These are, certainly defensible. In terms of the impact on the environment, it's unclear. I think generally work from home is good for the environment, but it's less obvious than you think. So you're totally right. Commutes down. So that's a clear win, less travel emissions. The one thing that makes it complicated, or a couple of things that make it complicated, is one, HVAC system. So it turns out offices are being air-conned or heated anyway. And then if you're at home, you're kind of doing double heating and aircon. So that's one issue. The other is people are now moving further away and living out in the suburbs, which means their commutes are longer and there's more space. So my guess is net it's good. And there is a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and I posted up my LinkedIn post actually a while back showing this, but it's slightly more complex than you might think because of these offsetting effects. I think the bigger game, by the way, is on society. Someone mentioned disabilities. There's a whole bunch of folks that gain massively from the ability to work from home. Folks with a disability, people with young kids, people close to retirement. So I think it's an enormous societal gain. I think, businesses, we benefit, the climate probably benefits, but the last one is, that's ongoing research, to be honest. It's a hard question because there's so many offsetting effects.
Brilliant. I think there's been a lot of value from this one. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks very much for the questions. This is great.
Yeah, great questions. Great questions. And we'll make a note of those that we didn't get to. And I love that idea. Let's get some answers coming from customers and sharing that information with each other.
Great. And by the way, I'll share the slides. So in fact, I can put it on chat
Perfect.
right now. If I can get my, and Helen, if you want to, I'll put Dropbox link to the, is it going to work? Okay. And I'll put a Dropbox link to, just now I'm live. It's crashing. Okay.
Well, if you send it to us, we can link to it in the email that we're going to send out anyway with the recording. So maybe that's.
Oh, here we go. Okay, I put a link on the chat. If anyone wants to do it, you're welcome to download the slides. And Helen, if you just add a link as well, those are the live slides.
Yeah, we will. Great. People are madly clicking that link now before we hang up. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Helen, do you want to check it downloads, actually? Should do.
Do it. Click. Yeah, I can get it.
Great. Thanks very much, guys.